Everyone must have seen Monty Python's Dead Parrot sketch.
My lad, I wish to complain about this parrot what I purchased not half an hour ago from this very boutique.
Oh yes, the Norwegian blue. What's wrong with it?
I'll tell you what's wrong with it. It's dead, that's what's wrong with it.
But the four Yorkshiremen talking about what it was like when I were young must be the second best known Monty Python sketch. When I was a kid, I used to listen to the oldies talking about how things used to be so much better back in the good old days. Now I'm old. I've lived through the olden days. And let me tell you, this is all a load of rubbish. Things are just so much better now. I'm an engineer. My first proper job was working in a factory way back in 1958 when I was just 18. That's a long time ago, 62 years to be precise. At the start of the working day, there were just swarms of workers lining up to get into the factory where they would beetle off to their machines and start the day's work. There was an awful lot of manual work, so production was slow and tedious. There was simply a limit to how much stuff could be made, and that is what determined the standard of living. Look what life is like now. We have so much automation, computer-controlled machines, artificial intelligence, that we can produce stuff in excess of what people can actually use. The problem for modern factories now is how they can sell all those piles of stuff they can make so easily, which is why the two most powerful companies on earth are really just advertising agencies. But if you watch the news, you would think the world is in imminent danger of collapse, with terrible things happening all over the world. Boatloads of refugees fleeing their war-torn countries, people starving from lack of food, political unrest, terrorist attacks, climate change, and the virus, and the list just goes on and on. My interest is in how we grow food. I can tell you as a fact that we grow enough food to feed the entire world's population. So how is it that when we're growing all this food, there are millions of people who are starving? How is it that we have all this manufacturing capacity? We have innovations like the internet, where we can search out information on virtually anything we want and chat across the world for virtually free. All this great stuff, yet we seem to be in a state of perpetual doom and gloom. I could give a long and detailed talk about how our politicians and leaders really have just not caught up with this new world order we now live in, and have failed to adjust their economic thinking. But that would just add to the doom and gloom and achieve little. So let me tell you a story. I like telling stories. One of the better periods of my life was when my kids were young. We all used to climb into one bed. They would give me a long list of things they wanted in their story. Witches, exploding mushrooms, monsters with big teeth and claws, magic suits so people could fly, drinks that would make you invisible, and of course 2 little kids who got caught in some terrible trouble where they were certain to die but were magically rescued at the very last minute, just before it was time to turn off the lights and go to sleep. But the little varmints grew up, so I had no one to tell stories to. But as compensation, they actually produced me a bunch of grandkids, which was fine until they grew up too. But as yet, no sign of great-grandkids. So I'm making this video in preparation for the arrival of my great-grandkids when they turn up, so they understand why the world seems such a mess, when it is actually not. Now this story is really one your kids may enjoy. But if you want to hang around and see what happens, just pull out a bag of chips, make yourself comfortable and listen along. Like all good stories, it starts once upon a time. It just happens that this time was a very long time ago, about 1,000,000 years. Once upon a time, a long time ago, our great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents lived in trees. And there were a lot of trees. And they were very good at swinging from branch to branch. So all the ferocious monsters below could not catch them. And they went, can't catch me. And they lived a happy and contented life. Then something terrible happened. The climate changed, and all the trees died. So our ancient relatives were left standing in an open plain, surrounded by very hungry and ferocious beasts, looking for a quick meal. Nice and tender, with no big teeth or claws, and only able to run quite slowly, so they were easy to catch. In other words, people just like us. Just add a bit of tomato sauce and we are a perfect meal for a ferocious beast. This climate change was perfectly natural and very useful because a few million years later people could say that climate change is perfectly natural, so they don't have to worry about it. And many people were eaten until there were just a few left. So they all sat around and decided they had to do something, or there would be no one left, no kids to tell stories to. So they made a plan. So next time a ferocious beast came along, they put their plan into action. All the big strong people who were good at throwing stones made a big ring, and all the other people, the mums and kids, basically collected stones which they gave to the strong people who threw with great force and accuracy at the ferocious beasts. Now, the ferocious beast with big teeth and claws had never come across a creature that stood on its hind legs so its arm were free to throw stones. But that did not worry them. They were big and strong and fast, so they raced up to the people looking for a nice dinner. But as they got close, they were met with a hail of stones coming really fast and banging them on their noses, which really hurt. So all the ferocious beasts decided there were other dinners just down the road, and so they all nicked off, leaving your great grandparents in peace. And that is why you are here today, to hear this story. So all the people had a big party to celebrate this great innovation they had just discovered, and they called it cooperation, and we became the most cooperative species on the face of the earth. We had learnt the lesson. If you don't cooperate, we all get eaten by ferocious beasts. But if we do, we can work magic. So we ended up building all sorts of things by cooperating together. Houses, towns and cities, big tractors for growing food, cars for going on holiday to the beach, and aeroplanes and mobile phones and the internet for playing games on with other people from all over the world. And that should be the end of the story, so I could say, and they all lived happily ever after, the end. Well, that is not actually how it worked out, because there are one or two people who looked at all the marvellous things that people were making and said, this is really nice, and they wanted more of this good stuff for themselves. So they persuaded the other people to make all sorts of nice things for them, so they could have anything and everything they wanted. They did have to tell the other people a few porkies to get them to cooperate, but no one worried about that. And by the time the people were so used to cooperating together that they went out and chopped down all the trees, dug big holes in the ground to dig up all the good stuff, and worked really hard so everybody, even the greedy people, could have everything they wanted. And people called that the exploitative society. And it all worked nicely for a bit, until it didn't. There was so much pollution in the air that the climate started to change again. But no one worried because it all happened before. But other bad things began to happen. Some people didn't have enough food to eat, so they died. Other people had more than enough to eat, piles and piles of it, but it's all full of sugars and bad stuff.
Millions of people every night go to bed without food. And millions of people are throwing away their food. Waste on the one hand, and poverty and deprivation and hunger on the other hand. Malnutrition on the one hand and obesity on the other hand. What kind of system have we created?
It's not a reflection of good democracy when a company, a group of companies, an industry says our interests are more important than the national interest. At what juncture, at what point does morality enter into the economic calculus?
Democracy is government by the people. Plutocracy is government by the rich. In a typical plutocratic state, economic inequality is high. social mobility low.
But the soil was worn out, so there was no good stuff in the food. So lots of people got very sick and they died. So some people got together and they all sat around and chatted about what to do. And some people said, "Do you remember the stories that Grandpa used to tell us about how we were all being eaten by ferocious creatures? But just before we were all eaten, we all got together and learned to cooperate and throw stones at the ferocious beasts, and they all nicked off. So we lived on and eventually became the most successful creature on the planet until we exploited the planet so badly that bad things happened. We should do the same thing again." So they all formed a big group and went out to the farmers and said, "The food you are growing may be cheap and plentiful, but it is killing us. So we want you to put all sorts of good stuff back into the soil. We will give you all our waste food, and you just add more good stuff like rock dust, which is all full of minerals. So you grow food for us that will make us healthy and live a long and healthy life." But the farmer said, "No, it would just cost too much money, and they weren't making enough as it was." But the people said, "Don't worry, we will pay you good money for good food. That is only fair, and we'll organise people to come and pick up the food from your farms, and we spread it among our group, and that will save us a lot of money, so we can afford to pay you good money for your good food." And they all agreed that this was a good idea and a lot safer than throwing stones at ferocious beasts, so they all lived happily ever after. The end. I run 3 websites. Gbiota.com is a technical website with many articles explaining how best to set up and manage Gbiota beds. Gbiota Club is a social website where Gbiota Club members can chat and exchange information and form local groups to source Gbiota food from commercial Gbiota growers. Picnic.shop is the club's trading site where members can buy and sell products within the club and arrange to purchase key products from selected suppliers.